Hi there. Welcome back. This is Casey, and in today's video, I have something of a summary iridology reading for you. So it's going to be a little more casual. This is for a friend, and I'm just going to give you an eagle's eye perspective of what I am seeing in these eyes. And then there will be some topics that I will expand on in future videos. And then there will be some topics that I've already expanded on in past videos. And you're also very welcome to check out my website, lightandbody.com, for a pretty robust iridology library. So, all right, let's jump right in. And we have here in the mirrored sense, we have the left eye on the right and the right eye on the left. So in terms of universal features or features that I'm seeing in both eyes, what is standing out to me? Right off the bat, the first thing that catches my attention is the skin ring. And we can see this darkened area on the periphery of the iris, and it is distinct, it is pronounced in both eyes. And I actually want to show you. So with the skin ring, this is actually going to be a topic that I cover more extensively in future videos. So I may take these eyes as an example of a skin ring, because what we're seeing in the skin ring is we're seeing a sort of breakdown or deterioration, not only in the function of the skin. So very simply put, when you see a skin ring, you're thinking, okay, well, the skin's ability to function as an excretory organ of elimination is being hindered. So that's the most basic thing that you see. But the other thing about the skin ring is, like I said, there's an actual breaking down. And so we're getting into the chronic levels here when we're looking at the dark area on the periphery of the iris. So we're seeing an actual breakdown of the iris fibers. And so, like I said, the most basic explanation of a skin ring is the skin's somehow being compromised, or its function is being compromised. And you will see this most of the time in the skin. And this person has experienced some congestion issues with the skin. So she does, definitely the skin ring does resonate with her. But on a deeper level, aside from what I just mentioned, we're really looking at a few other factors as well. And yeah, like I said, I want to do another whole video on the skin ring, but just keep in mind, and as we go into these eyes, that we're looking at the thyroid. So the thyroid controlling the metabolism, and this is going to be connected to how well we sweat or don't sweat, and how well that function is working according to and in connection with the thyroid. So we're going to look at that, and we do see some other signs of thyroid here in these eyes. And then we're also looking at, which doesn't get mentioned a lot, but the fact that there is a skin ring in any eye, you're always going to be looking at what I just mentioned, these two factors, like the health of the skin, of course, the thyroid, but really on a deeper level, we're looking at the kidneys. We're looking at the kidneys and their capacity to filter out waste, because whatever the kidneys cannot filter is going to get thrown to the other organs or organ systems of elimination. And so that would be, you know, we have the kidneys, we have the colon, and bowels, and we also have the skin and lungs. All right, and so another thing, you will often see the lungs associated with that skin ring. And in this eye, I'm going to show you that there is actually a connection to the kidneys as well. All right, so real quick, I want to bring into focus here a sort of supersized, super magnified this eye, and I want to show you, you can see on the in the periphery here. And so what we're seeing is this breakdown of iris fibers, and we're seeing the true color of the iris underneath the iris fibers. In a blue eye, you're going to see blue. In a brown eye, it's going to be like a darker brown on the skin ring. So you'll either see a dark blue or a dark brown for the skin rings. But you can see, and I did lose some of the resolution in the upper portion of this iris, but when I magnified it, but we can see here very faintly, and this is something that I've just been reading more on, because German iridology has, at least from the perspective of Joseph Deck, there is a more expanded perspective on the skin ring. And he stated, and honestly, when I read this, I just wasn't quite convinced until I saw it in these eyes. There is an actual breakdown in the fibers here in the skin ring, and you can also see, and this is something that is specific to Deck's teaching, you can actually see these very faint little crypts or lacuna openings. They're little openings in the iris fibers all along the edge, so you can sort of see it in action, how it happens. All right, so that I'm going to save for another day. We're going to go way more into the skin, but while I have this eye up in super magnification mode, I also want to point out the iris fibers. So we're going to go back to both of the eyes in just a second here, but one of the main things that I'm going to note when I do an iris reading is the constitution. So this is actually, I wasn't able to see it in such great detail, but once I got this photo magnified, you can see that the iris fibers are very tightly woven. This is a strong constitution. This is a very strong constitution. Like we're talking about like close to silk constitution, with the exception of when we get into the periphery, the outer layer of the iris, we're seeing less of these tightly woven and straight iris fibers. So you can see in some areas they become a little wavy. There might be some openings, and just basically a compromising of the integrity of the structure in that area. But other than that, and then there are some other, you know, there's some things that I'm going to note as well. Like we have, you know, a good amount of radii solaris, lymphatic congestion, a little bit in the liver, and then there's a few other highlights I want to talk about. But other than that, this is actually a very strong constitution. So let's go ahead and we'll get right back to both eyes. I think I could do that much. Okay. I think that should be good. All right, so far we have strong constitution, skin ring, we have a blue eye, we have that looks hazel for the most part at, when you're speaking to this person. But if you look closely, you can tell it's a blue eye, all of that brown. So let's go ahead and look here at the left eye. And of the two eyes, the left eye seems a bit more chronic. And so, yeah, you can see that in the darker browns, and we have all of this coming from the gut. So there's major emphasis on the gut for this person, all about healing the digestive system, because you can see all of the stress that is, it's originating from the gut area. And as I look closely at the pupillary margin, there does seem to be some level of malabsorption. So you can see that in the slightly uneven edges of that pupillary margin. And then from there, we have several radii solaris, which are, rays of the sun, translated. And in the case of iridology, often this is like rays of toxicity that are emanating from the source of the iris, which is the pupil. And that would be, in iridology, the stomach lining. Okay, so this is a lot about the stomach. And there also does seem to be some level of probably like a hydrochloric acid situation, like a more of a chronic digestive situation, a more chronic stomach. So maybe low hydrochloric acid. You can see that in the darker. So right in here is the stomach ring or stomach halo. That is different from the bowel wall. So, but you can see the darkness, any kind of dark gray, be it gray, brown, whatever, in that stomach region is going to indicate a hypo-functioning stomach. And then outside of that, we also see, so stomach would be sort of right outside the pupil, and then the bowel wall, as I can see it, I'm going to trace it out. I'm kind of losing it in here. It's not distinct, which is not, it's not good or bad, but we're losing that distinction in that area. And so you can see from my drawing here, this is the left eye, and then let's go over to the right eye. We're looking at the bowel wall. There's a slight drop in the transverse colon. So here, transverse colon is just superior or above the pupil, and you can see it's dropped a little bit. So we're looking at a little bit of a prolapse in the transverse colon, and which also is going to trigger a curiosity about the thyroid and parathyroid especially, which we're going to see in just a second. So, but yeah, universal features, strong constitution, a lot of focus on the stomach and bowels, skin ring. Radii solaris are in both eyes, but I'm seeing them more chronic in the left eye. And then this is not a coincidence, we're also seeing more signs of compromise. And this would be here, we're looking at very much like right on the edge of the kidney and then the reproductive organs, which I'm going to get into because we're looking at birth control again. All right, so we're looking here at this pigmentation, and it is essentially right on the border of the adrenal gland. And then we have in between the adrenal gland, we have the perineum and the rectum, and then right here we have the uterus. Okay, so most, I don't want to say most definitely, but from my perspective, almost certainly this marking here is related to the use of an IUD. All right, and not like a lot of traditional birth control, which is awesome. You know, we haven't had that like literal actual hormone disruption, but we have had a copper IUD. So, and it's interesting that the metal, you know, copper, and then we see this sora here, this discoloration in I'm not going to say it's a copper color, it's actually more brown, but we're seeing certainly the connection between metal and pigmentation, which is certainly not unheard of, and actually I would say somewhat common. Okay, so this is going to be something that I want to go into if I haven't said enough about birth control. Then I want to do another video on, just like a separate video on the effects of birth control and I've seen a lot of different irises with a lot of different forms. Okay, so we have IUD, we have the shot, we have the, I don't know, I think there's like a patch, and then there's the more, you know, traditional or time-tested form of taking actual hormones, and they are synthetic, by the way. So I'm going to do that in a separate video, but in that video is going to cover, because it's not just about how birth control shows up in the iris, and that's just like, I mean, honestly, like most of the women's eyes that I look at, there's going to be some sign going on. And that's just, it's just life these days. So I'm not going to, you know, speak further on that, but I want to talk about, in another video, I want to talk about the female reproductive organs and how they are connected to the adrenal glands and the kidneys. Okay, so we'll leave that there. That is certainly, I would consider that adrenal gland, and then merging into female reproductive in the left eye, specifically right in here, we are looking at the uterus. All right, and then let's go ahead and return to the universal feature so I don't get all hung up on this topic here. Okay, so we have radii solaris, more prominent in the left eye. The left side of the body is showing a few more signs of stress than the right. But overall, they're pretty close. They're pretty similar. Not seeing any huge drastic differences in the two sides of the body. We're also seeing nerve rings, right? They're a little bit more acute. So they're pretty slight. There's a faint notion of one in here. And then in here, seeing a nerve ring, but for the most part, the nerve rings are more present or pronounced in the head and brain area. And I say that it's more acute because it's white. The nerve rings are more white. So sometimes you will see them go from, just like anything in the eyes, you'll see them go from a light color to a dark color, and that would indicate the level of imbalance or, you know, stress that we're placing on these areas. So we have nerve rings. We have a little bit, there's a few a few somewhat zigzaggy fibers that I just highlighted here in the right eye. And those will maybe perhaps indicate a significance depending on what area that they're falling into when we look at the iridology chart. All right, so I don't have the chart up on the screen. Again, this is more of a summary. So if you don't have an iris chart, I have a few on my website that are free to download, and they are in pretty good resolution. So if you don't have an iris chart, download one and then grab it and follow along as we go through the more specific anatomy and physiology that we're seeing in these eyes. And I'm thinking what other universal features I'm seeing before we move on to do that. So we do have a hint of cholesterol, and you can see that in the lower part of the iris here down at the, essentially, if I follow down, and you can see that down in the lower part of the iris on the periphery, you can see a bit of a glisten. All right, and so that is showing me that there may be a bit of a higher cholesterol. I have done a video on cholesterol. It's not about what you eat, it's about inflammation. So you can check that out if you would like to. And for this person in particular, it's not really an issue. It is within her family for sure. So she's young, so it could become a little bit of an issue. But for me, it's just more like, okay, let's note that this is a tendency, genetically speaking. And we can see that again in the little bit of sheen and shimmer here. And then we're also seeing, and this is going to be another topic for another video, even though I have done a whole video on anemia. We're not seeing anemia. We are seeing, and it took me to, you know, when I bumped up the magnification, then I could see more so this bluish, like a violet hue, as Dr. Morse refers to it. And you can see this sort of bluish haze on the periphery. It's outside of the skin ring, actually. And to an iridologist, this is going to indicate the presence of a lack of iron or anemia. And so, yes, like I said, I have done a video on that. That is, again, more so tied to the kidneys than anything else. Anemia, so the kidneys produce the hormone erythropoietin, also known as EPO. So if you're in that hormone in particular is produced almost pretty much exclusively by the kidneys. The liver does produce a small percentage of it in infancy and preborn, you know, so in the fetal stages, but in a healthy adult, the majority of EPO is produced in the kidneys. And the hormone EPO, or erythropoietin, signals to the body to produce more red blood cells. So, in summary, if you have a bit of sluggishness in the kidneys or a weakness in the kidneys, you very well may end up with a low iron count. And so I have confirmed that with this person. She has had that in blood tests, maybe just slightly, maybe just once or twice, I'm not sure, but that did resonate. So we have that, and those, you know, all signs usually point, quite often, a lot of the signs point back to the kidneys. All right, so we will take a look at her kidneys here in just a minute. I think that might sum it up for the universal signs. And now let's go ahead and go into some more specifics. All right, so starting with the left eye, let me grab my notes here. Okay, there actually are a number of the brain zones that we're seeing, and I'm not going to go into detail on the brain zones. I have a pretty thorough explanation of the brain zones on my website if you would like to look more into it. And then on a lot of videos, I've gone into more detail. So left eye, we're seeing, so in terms of the brain zones we have here in the left eye at 12 o'clock, the animation life is not activated, but I'm just giving us some orientation. So 12 noon, and then at 1 o'clock, pretty much straight up, this is highlighting the inherent mental, also known as the anxiety brain zone, and it's totally normal. Don't worry, that's just how it is. But I don't think this person is experiencing any like out of the ordinary anxiety. But this is actually a pretty significant marking in her iris. So we're on the edge. I would say that this is inherent mental. And again, you can read up on the brain zones on my website. It's sort of also on the edge of sensory motor, but I'm calling it as inherent mental, especially because if you trace the inherent mental, you're going to see we're right at that place where this marking, the Sora, was like, is it the adrenal gland or is it the female reproductive? So there's a connection here. So that is highlighted. And then, hold on, let me grab my notes. What else do we have? So yeah, inherent mental on the edge of sensory motor. And then we also have a little bit going on in the medulla. I did a whole video on the medulla brain zone. Not a huge significance, but a little. And the medulla is really significant to so many of our bodily processes that, it doesn't hurt to read up on it. It is showing up a bit just in the darkness, like a fog almost. And then actually, I want to backtrack because we also have the pituitary and the pineal gland showing up, okay? And their associated brain zones. So I'm just backtrack to that. Pituitary, pineal, both fairly dark. And it's always interesting because it seems sort of haphazard how these lines go up, but more often than not, they cut through like very, obviously very specific areas, but also most of the time areas of great importance. Okay, so we're seeing some major brain zones highlighted, and with the pituitary and pineal, they have their own brain zones associated with that, which we will get to, but I wanted to just say that those glands in particular, okay? And then medulla, a little bit in the neck area, a slight darkness in, I would say this is right above the heart area. So heart's going to be right at 3 o'clock. And then like aorta is going to be just slightly above that and closer to the pupil. Nothing major. in the heart. Essentially, we're looking at a lot of congestion in the lungs. So we're seeing, I actually didn't mention this in the like bird's eye view of both of the eyes, a lot of lymphatic congestion and inflammation, and that's where, that's where the issues are coming from. Um, okay, but overall heart looks good. Inflammation for sure in the heart and lung area, but no like crazy, lacuna or out of the ordinary iris fibers or pigmentation or anything like that. So it looks pretty clean. A little bit going on in the spleen. So she might want to take a look at that. Nothing major or out of the ordinary. And then we also have this psora spot here, and that is in the stomach area, but it's very close if you're looking at the bowels. It's located more so in the sigmoid colon. So I have spoken to that a little bit. The sigmoid colon, generally speaking, is the most, according to Jensen, the most toxic place in the whole entire body. It's the most toxic area of the colon and digestive system, and which is the most toxic place of the body, right? So it's like the darkest, the deepest, darkest of the dark, the sigmoid colon. It's like where everything is waiting to come out. The sigmoid does lead directly to the rectum. So we're like, and then we hop down in here at very close actually to this pigmentation. But anyway, thought I would mention that this whole area is this is the stomach, and outside of it is the sigmoid. I'm seeing this as a significant, could very well be contained within the stomach, but I'm seeing it sort of radiate out a little bit into the sigmoid also. Let's see, what else do I have? And then we have something of a radii solaris here in the thigh, knee, foot. This whole section would be approximately thigh, knee, foot. I usually just give that whole real estate to the kidney, but I forget there's actually a thigh, knee, foot here. Okay. Kidneys right here. Okay. So as when I first highlighted this spot, we are really on the edge of kidney and adrenal. And then we have the uterus in this area, and the bladder may be of some significance as well. I'm going to hop right up to the, 9:30-ish area. We're seeing a little bit in the thyroid. But it's not a huge, I'm seeing this area in here, and then a bit in the parathyroid, a little bit of darkness in here. And then above that, we have a little bit in the nose. We're also seeing some markings in the acquired mental, speech, brain zone, and this is actually, I would call this one of the brain zones of the pituitary gland. So, and then we have ego pressure here. Ego pressure, and you can look it up again on my website, has a lot to do with just how it sounds, like how you pressure yourself about achieving your goals, like how driven you are. And it can, depending on the marking and the person, it could come down on either not extreme, but you know what I mean? Like it could come down on one side or the other of that. So you could be very driven or not driven at all. You could even to the point of like berating yourself about not being, it's kind of like a perfectionism brain zone. So there's that. And that also has to do with blood pressure a bit. And then in this area, in general, in both eyes, I was seeing a little bit of jaw. And she has had, and also eye. So like when you see those markings, it sometimes is like, yeah, well, a lot of us have like tension in the jaw, but she has experienced definite tension in the jaw, a little bit of TMJ, and then issues with the eyes or focus on the eyes. So those did come up. And so when you see them and they're noticeable, definitely mention them or note them if you're doing a reading for yourself. And then you're also going to be looking at any of the corresponding areas like in the periphery. So depending on where the skin ring is the most pronounced, you're going to be looking inside those areas too. Like in here we have a pretty significant, some lacuna or radii solaris really in the medulla, sort of merging on the mastoid, which I already talked about, but now I'm looking and I'm like, wow, okay, so there's a lot of significance in the periphery of the iris and this whole area. This is the lungs, this whole area. All right, let's move on to the right eye and see what we have here. I think that the right eye, as I mentioned, is a little bit less chronic. It's really interesting how these radii solaris, this one here in the right eye, it's pretty close to 12 o'clock by the time it gets to where it's going, but it's got a little bit of a curve to it. Whenever I see things that are not exactly straight, I always think about the parathyroid. So again, we're going to be looking, and we saw that in here in the left eye. And we're probably going to see it a bit over here in the right eye as well. So we do have some radii solaris in the right eye. We have animation life, which is our, I think of it as the crown chakra, connection to source, energy, vitality. So there could be a little bit of, usually if it's a dark radii solaris, it's going to be like a lack of energy or vitality. And then that can be connected to also the thigh foot. I'm seeing a little bit in the thigh foot, not too much though. All right, so we have animation life sort of veering left a little bit. Kind of funny, right? It like veers into sensory motor. So we're like losing our balance, and yeah, so it just barely borders sensory motor. And let's go ahead and move right though. So we also have this fog in this area. I would say, and this is the pituitary right here. We have pituitary in both eyes. And we also have a little bit creeping into pineal as well. It's the main brain zone associated with the pineal gland is going to be acquired mental speech, but even more so mental ability. So both of these are being highlighted. Mental ability and acquired mental speech. And this has a lot to do with like the processing, not necessarily the processing speed of the brain, but the ability to flow that through the throat chakra and speak it. You can read more about it, but that's essentially what this is, the ability to speak. It's also about learning and listening, expressing yourself clearly. And this is going to be related more so perhaps physically, but I see it more so on a like an emotional, spiritual level to the thyroid and the the more psycho-spiritual aspects of speaking, communicating clearly, expressing yourself clearly without fear of judgment or, you know, other stuff that could happen. Um, you say what you want to say. All right, so there's that. And a lot. Okay, we're seeing it's almost like more acute on the right side. There's a lot of white. So there's a lot of inflammation in the eye, and then it is going, when you see the white, it's inflammation, and then it's definitely going into the chronic. You could even say that there's some sulfur, which I don't necessarily see. I see this more as like inflammation and lymphatic congestion, but I did have a photo of her eyes with the cell phone camera. Actually, let me see if I can find that. That's right there. And you see that. So this is a like a selfie. It's actually pretty good. Um, and this is showing you that if you just saw this picture, you would be like, yeah, sulfur for sure. Okay. Um, okay. So let's move on, see what else there is to see. Again, we have the jaw and the eye, very closely connected here. Same sort of story with the jaw and the eye. We have a bit in the, this radii solaris in the tonsil area, which is essentially the throat. And right below that, we have the thyroid. Okay, so thyroid here. Inflammation, congestion, and then when you look over at the left, you also see, some darkness. So I would say that the thyroid, it's not like inherently weak or anything, but there is a tendency perhaps for the hypo to hyper ranging, depending on if you're in the acute or chronic phases of symptoms with the thyroid. And for me, when I'm looking at these eyes, the thyroid is more so about its connection to the skin. All right. Let's hop on down here a little bit in the tiny foot. Not too much. And so I actually want to erase this because I want to take a look at a little bit. It's not actually, there's no like inherent weaknesses that we're seeing in the kidney here, which is medial to the tiny foot. Definitely some in the adrenal gland, just like in the left eye. So a little bit, not too much, kind of the same story, just like a lot of inflammation and lymphatic congestion. Easy to clean up, right? Um, and if depending on your constitution. So like side note, if you're interested in this person's health history, she is like pretty much fruitarian, and she has been for years. So like fruit during the day and then maybe a salad. So fruitarian technically does include greens, leafy greens from my perspective. So she's pretty much in line with that, and she's just on her path, like it's a path. It's a journey. So we follow the signs, and we do our best. So she's on that journey now. And, you know, doing really well with it. So I don't have to give advice in terms of diet and stuff like that. But all right, so a little bit in the kidney adrenal. I'm going to hop right on up to this tiny, tiny little speck of a dot. And that is in the breast area. So again, possibly connected to the what we saw with the reproductive system. Possibly, I mean, it's almost even like on the edge of the skin ring as well, that breast area. Okay, let me see my notes if I have anything else. A little bit in the mastoid and medulla. Again, so you may want to read up on the medulla brain zone. And then, yeah, I think that's it for my notes. So that should wrap up this session. I would say, just as an overview, pituitary, pineal, somewhat in the, also some of the brain zones, but I would really focus on those glands. And then the main focus is the gut, and really activating and getting that digestion going, clearing out any, further impurities or what have you. As you detox and cleanse, the body will readjust. So things like gut bacteria and all that are just, it's going to be on a spectrum while as we go through this process. And then whatever will come soon. I do want to do another video, especially just dedicated to the skin ring or the scurf rim. And we're going to talk about all the implications of that. I haven't mentioned this. There's a little bit of a lymphatic rosary, just a little bit. Like you can see in the periphery, I'm at the right eye here. I'm just kind of going around like a little bit of faint little cloudy areas right here, right here, right here. Like it's a very slight lymphatic rosary. So we're not only talking about the lymphatic system, we're talking about when we get into the rosary, like even like lymph nodes. Okay, so focus on the lymph, kidneys, as per usual, and the gut. And everything's gonna fall right into place. All right, thanks for watching, and I will be back sometime with some future follow-up videos, and I hope you're all doing well, and until next time. Okay, bye.